Today we're going to look at the flexibility for the press handstand. Now ideally we should have very long hamstrings and calves, be able to comfortably get our palms onto the floor and get our hips on top of our hands to allow us to lift the feet up in the air and then go up to handstand from there, slowly come back down with control. Keep that hip on top of the hands, meaning I can hang here for time and then come back down again. But in reality, when we're first starting our handstand press journey, most of us are going to be something like this. When we try and get that hip crease on top of the hands for the press, we're going to be like this. And our feet are going to stay firmly on the ground. So today I'm going to go through the best flexibility exercises to get from that point to that point as quick as possible. Now there's a 9-point flexibility test that's commonly used. Let's use that first. We're going to work out whether you're naturally flexible or if you're naturally inflexible. This is going to change how your body responds to stretching, so it's quite important that you know this. Number one, I'm going to hold my hand up like this. I'm going to pull my little finger down. Now notice I can't get my finger to 90 degrees. So if you're like me, you score 0 points. If you can get that finger to 90 degrees, so if that sticks out that way, you score 1 point. Do exactly the same on the other hand. Again, I don't score a point, but if yours goes 90 degrees, you score 2 points. We're going to see if you can get your thumb to your forearm. So this thumb should touch here to score another point. Again, I don't get one. Then over to the other side, check the same thing. Can you get that thumb to touch your forearm? If you can, you might have up to 4 points there. Now let's look at our elbows. See if our elbows hyperextend. See, mine doesn't. If it did, it would go up like this. And again, you'd score 1 point there, another point there. So you could have up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points. Then we look at our knees. Do your knees hyperextend? Same thing as we just done for your elbows. Now what we're going to find here is, for me, because I've done lots of head to toe stretching, I've actually changed my knees and my knees actually hyperextend now a little bit. So I'm going to score my first 2 points. 1 point for the right, 1 point for the left. So you could have scored up to 8 points. I've got 2 so far. Last one, with knees locked backwards, can you put palms on the floor? If you can, you get 1 point for that. That's the final point. So I scored 3 points. So you're going to be sitting somewhere on this scale. I'm now a number 3 because I made myself a 3. I was sitting at a 0 when I first started, and I've made myself a 3 through flexibility training. However, it doesn't matter how much I'm stretching, I'm never going to get to a 9. The same as if you're hypermobile, you're never going to make it all the way to a 0. Now someone who's over this side is going to respond better to strength training. Someone up this end is going to respond quicker to stretching. So to get the same results in terms of stretching and mobility work, this person's going to have to put in a lot more volume, time, consistency than this person. However, this person's going to need to put a lot of time in mobility, so more strength training of the range of motion that they have already. And it's also worth bearing in mind that it's not just flexibility that's going to affect your journey towards the press handstand. It's how strong you are, it's your limb length, it's how quickly you can learn a skill. It's the training volume, consistency, your body weight and the body weight distribution in your body. All of those things are going to affect how long it's going to take you to get a press handstand. It's just really important for you to control the ones that you have control over and also make the most of the ones that you're already good at. When it comes to getting your first press, we only really need to focus on 2 key movements. So the forward fold, so how deep you can fold in this position, and then the straddle forward fold or good morning position. So let's first test your forward fold. I'm going to take my shoes off. I'm just going to stand with knees locked backwards and I'm going to see what I can get to touch the floor. So if I can get fingertips, then awesome. If I can't get fingertips, I can just see where my fingers get to on my body. So if I lock the knees backwards, go as deep as I can. Now I'm at mid-shin. Now I'm at ankle. So I have that reference point. When you're doing this, I'd also video from the side, because the other thing we're going to look at is the shape of your spine. So what you'll see is someone who's tighter will tend to be more like this, so their spine goes out more forwards in that direction and doesn't really round or articulate very well. Someone who's in the middle will tend to have some rounding through their spine, but still a big gap here. And then someone who's flexible will have a straighter spine at the bottom, like a longer spine, but it will also be closer to the legs. So the torso is close to the legs and there's not much gap between them. Now, if you are someone who's more flexible, go fingertips to the floor, go palms to the floor. You could put hands behind you as well. That's another good test because it forces the torso to get closer to the legs. Video, I'll take the picture from the side so you can see. There's a few different ways of lengthening that forward fold positioning, but you're mainly focusing on the calves, the hamstrings, and then the spine. Now with the calves and the hamstrings, this is really good for you if you're tighter. I would go into a position like this where we're locking the knee backwards and we're aiming for 90 degrees here, and I'm also isolating one side at a time. So my knees lock backwards, I can reach forwards. So my first goal is put hands on the knees. Now when you are reaching forwards, don't think about taking your head to your knee. Think about taking your head towards your toe. Think that we're trying to lengthen the spine as much as possible, not round it like this. So lengthening forwards, see where you can get your hands to. You might get to the shin. Ideally, you're going to reach the foot. If you can reach the foot, you can go even further. If you want to wind it up even more, you can pull the foot backwards. So spending some time in a single leg hamstring stretch is very beneficial because you can do one side at a time and you can be a little bit more intense for that side. Now there's a few different ways of stretching it. You could do it like I just done with the foot up, which is nice because I can isolate it well, but I can also isolate it very nicely like this on the floor in the lunge position, holding onto the foot. Rosie's shedding hair at the moment, so I've got dog hair everywhere. And if you're super tight and just overusing the spine when you do your hamstring stretching, I'd recommend you do something like this, where you can keep your back flat on the floor. And this way we can just isolate that hamstring and calf. If I'm still tight, I can move further back away from the post or the wall, whatever I've got my foot up on. Just make sure this leg is also straight. This one's cool because you can lay here for time. 5-10 minutes in this position would be great. And then we have arguably the best exercise to work both hamstrings at the same time, plus also working the articulation and the lengthening of the spine, is the Jefferson curl. So with the Jefferson curl, you stand with your feet shoulder width apart, so like that, your knees soft, and then the first thing I'm going to do is take my chin to my chest. So I'm rolling down bit by bit through the spine. So next I'm going to my upper back, my mid back. I'm trying to round as much as possible, so you're trying to articulate each segment. Come down, now I get through the low back. Might feel a bit tight through there, so you can bounce, you can hang there for a little bit, and I'm going to carry on rolling down through the spine. Now once I've finished, I can't get any more movement in my spine, I'm going to lock the knees backwards, and then I'm going to start lengthening the spine down towards the floor. If I can get to the floor, I just bend the arms, keep coming down, trying to lengthen as much as I can. Now this one's very good for press handstand because we need that spinal articulation, the ability to move each segment of the spine, but we also need this deep forward fold position. And yes, you can press without using that, but for efficient presses to get multiple presses in a row, the more flexibility you get in the spine and also the calves and the hamstrings, the easier that press handstand is going to be. Now you can wind the Jefferson curl up even more by adding weight to it. You can increase the height, so when you get to the bottom, you go past your feet, down like that. You could add a squat in at the bottom. Excuse the clicky knees. So you can add a squat in at the bottom, pull yourself down as you come back out. So we have lots of different variations, but you just really want to focus on that spinal movement, the hamstring calf stretching, and then if you're flexible enough, that last part of the movement is the spinal lengthening. It's nearly like a low back stretch if you're flexible enough to feel that. Now that would be my two main hamstring stretches, the single leg version and the Jefferson curl. Obviously watch the Jefferson curl if you've got any spinal pathologies or if you had anything like a bulging disc and you've been told not to round your back. You could do more of a good morning type movement where we're keeping the back flat all the time. You could still go very deep with it over time by stretching the calves and the hamstrings, and it's going to put less stress on your back, but it's going to limit your movement in some way. So ideally, if you can do it, do the spinal articulation down, full movement with the Jefferson curl with the hamstring stretching and the calf stretching. Hanging out in a forward fold position by itself is very useful. Adding dorsiflexion of the calves is also really good for winding up, especially if you've got some flexibility there already, taking those elbows towards the toes. But they're all finishing touches once you've increased your range to a certain level. If you're flexible enough, another great one is getting yourself between the wall and your legs like this, and then straightening the legs into that position. If it's easy, go closer. Tricky part is getting in between your legs and the wall and standing straight there with the legs, and then try and pull your elbows towards the floor. Now only do this one if you can get your back on the wall. Don't do it if your head's on the wall, because it won't be good for the head or the neck. We also have the seated pike positions like this. Now notice I'm sitting with my back rounded, my low back is rounded. Ideally what we want to be in this position, if I can walk my hips backwards, is more of an upright position and even an anterior tilt in the low back. I struggle with that because I'm a bit tight in the hip area, but I'm trying to get belly button towards the thighs and then reaching down in front and going into a seated Forward fold. This is going to be much harder for most people to get the depth they can when they're standing, because when we're standing we have the weight pushing us up in that direction. Now I have to actively pull in that direction. So you could argue that it's not so good, or it's even better because you're having to actively do it. But I do a bit of both, with the main focus being on the Jefferson curl and the single leg stretching to get that initial length. But we can be trying to aim for head towards toes again, so we're lengthening the spine, closing this gap. And you can also be really nasty to yourself and work some compression. Now I wouldn't work the compression instead of flexibility, I would do it as an addition. And if you're newer to this style of training, I wouldn't do it at all, I'd just focus on the stretching to start with. But if you like pain, place the hands on the floor. I'd start with thumbs by knees, just lift your feet up in the air, come back down again. If that feels okay, walk your hands forwards. Same thing, keep going. And then I just pull it back a little bit when you find your max, and then just do repetitions there. It's horrible, but it's definitely a good addition when you get to a certain level. So we have the single leg hamstring stretching, the forward fold, plus the Jefferson curl type movements. I'll do those as the main ones. And then as an addition to that, if you're flexible enough, add in a dorsiflexion, the feet raised up, the wall compression one where you squish yourself between the legs on the wall, the pike seated variations, and then the nasty ones, the pike compression lifts. Now when it comes to the straddle mobility, the best way to test it is just to come into a seated position. See if you can sit here with a flat back. If you're not so flexible, this is where I started. I had a rounded position like that. So test that, take a picture from the side. If you do look like this, you shouldn't be stretching in this position. We should be raising the hips up. But if you can sit there with a better back position, more like that, we're more flatter in that position, then see if you can lean forwards even further. See if you can get one elbow to the floor. If you can do one elbow, do two elbows. Then see if you can get forehead to fists or fist, forehead to the floor, nose to the floor, chin to the floor, and then once I've warmed up, belly button and chest to the floor. So that's just a quick test, a quick measurement, and a way of tracking your progress. And the number one way of increasing this range of motion is just spending loads of time in this position. Sit here when you play with your kids, sit here when you work on your laptop, sit here when you're watching TV or playing Xbox. If you have no flexibility there, raise the hips up quite a bit, even bend the knees, just make sure you can sit in more of a flatter back position and just spend time there. And then over the time, you can start to lock out the knees and then just decrease the height of whatever you're sitting on. And then in terms of stretching, I'd be sitting in this position, making sure you can get into a flat low back position. So raise the hips up again if you need to. And then we can do good mornings. So the good morning just means you lean forwards and then come back again. Now I'm a big believer here is we shouldn't be putting our hands to the floor. We want our hips to be doing the work. So slowly increase that range. You could again use a target to try and get elbows towards the floor, further away from our body, because again, we're trying to lengthen the spine just like we was with the forward fold. You can again, like we did with the Jefferson curl, you could add weight, but I'd first get your body conditioned to using body weight and being able to open and close through the range that you already have. And if you are one of those people that is already super flexible, you might even need to decrease your range as you increase your strength through that range. So you might need to do a little bit of movement and get the body used to controlling that with the hips and not just collapsing onto the floor and having to push back off with your hands. As an addition to that, I would spend some time on the sides, so taking the shoulder towards the knee, the head towards the toe on both sides, but with the main time being spent going down the middle. And there's lots of cool variations, like having plates in front of you, putting a band around a post and pulling yourself towards the post while you're in that seated straddle. But again, there are additions you can add on. The basics is just sitting in that position and doing the repetitions up and down. We can do the standing version. So for the standing version, I'm going to stand with my feet about the same width as I was when I was seated. Then with a flat back, I'm going to take the hips backwards and then stand back up again. So we're doing the standing good morning in the straddle position. A good target here is to try and get forehead to touch the floor and come back up again. If you can do that, you can work the things like nose or chin. Whoops, not with a cap on. But make sure you can fully open at the top. Straddle up mobility is fantastic as well. So where we go all the way down to a seated position and then back up to the start position, making sure you open the hip all the way at the top. If you can't get to the floor, you could just use some bumper plates or a step like this. Just make sure that you've got somewhere to sit onto and that you can push off and then use the hips to stand up at the top. But priority needs to be the straddle mobility, spending time in that straddle position. Now if we're feeling nasty, we can do exactly the same as you've done with the pike position, and we can work some compression. I definitely wouldn't do this one if you don't have a certain amount of flexibility. I'd make sure you can sit with your palms on the floor and lift your feet up. If you can't do that yet, I'd still work on your stretching as priority. But if you can lift the legs up, you can go up and down in that position. You can do circles outwards, you can do circles inwards. To make it harder, we can take the hands further away. You can go into like butterfly position, so bringing the toes together and then straightening the legs and back again. That's also very crampy and nasty. So number one, hanging out in that seated straddle position. Number two, add in the good mornings, the up and down, whenever you're doing your stretches before your training and things like that. It can be done in a seated position, just make sure you raise the hips up if you are tighter. You can do the standing version, we can go sideways, we can add the rotation, we can add the straddle ups, we can add the straddle compression drills. But number one, work on that seated straddle. And what you'll find as your flexibility increases, this hip crease is going to get closer and closer to being on top of the hands. Now when it gets on top of the hands, you're going to get lighter and lighter on the toes, and eventually you'll be able to lift up. But we also need the press handstand strengthening and balance drills, and you'll find all of those in this video. If you're after coaching or help with your training, check out my app and my website. Links are down in the description. Thumbs up and subscribe, we appreciate it, and I'll speak to you on the next one. Thanks guys.